Hi, and welcome back to part 2 of Selling the Cloud with my good friend Rob Schilling. And in part 1, Rob talks about how important it is to become CEO of your own sales territory and kind of taking ownership around that. And here in part 2, we're going to dive a little bit more into what that means. Can you use data, some of the new AI tools? And he shares some really interesting insight from his time when he was at SAP as Chief Operating Officer in Japan, and gives some tips for aspiring sales leaders on what it takes to be a CRO in today's world. So let's get going. Rob, question for you. What I'm hearing more and more when I'm talking in the SaaS world, and maybe this is more in sort of in the startup arena, but obviously it's critical important to understand how Oracle measures the team and how you measure your team. When you're at your customers, though, becoming more versed in the financial language of your customers and how they're measuring their business seems to be a big differentiator in success in the sales, arena at this point. Is your team, or do you see any differences in reps' performance in the ones that are leaning more into really taking an additional dive on the customer metrics, not just the sort of Oracle metrics?
Absolutely. It's a great point. And going back to, where I cut my teeth in terms of customers and customer success. I mean, our North Star is it's all about the customer and their success, right? So that every account needs to be referenceable post go live, and that there is no in between, right? So I mean that has to happen, and that goes back to business value and really real business value. I mean, there's you know we've all seen in the past some aspirational business value propositions and proposals to customers, but it's really getting into the what are the real measurements, right? How are you measuring this project, Mr. and Mrs. Customer, and what moves the needle for you? And it needs to be their numbers. They need to buy into it. But you got to earn that right, and you got to earn that right, and you earn that right by bringing value, right? Building a relationship early and often with the customer. I mean, to me, there's still nothing more valuable than that personal relationship. And it's not like you have to be buddies, and it's not about lunches and dinners. It's about them really understanding that you care, right? That you appreciate what they're saying and how they're saying it, and you understand their business. And when you break it down, it's in its simplicity. That hasn't changed, and to me, it's incredibly important, um, because then if there are changes in direction, or the business might be shedding off a unit or bringing on another company, at least they'll give you a little bit of heads up out of respect, because you've earned it, versus surprising you as well, and then that leads to not good conversations across the board. So it really is building that relationship with the customer. I can't say enough about it. It is priority number one for us, and the success and what differentiates folks out there is building that relationship. Yeah.
Rob, I love hearing you say that, and I love hearing that as the a premise throughout Oracle and through a lot of my old friends that are still there talking in those terms, because it is so important. And I'd love to go a little deeper into your thoughts about the whole relationship driven versus data driven sales, right? Everything has got to be, everything is data driven. Every sales organization is data driven. But how do you balance that out? And I'll give you one kind of example with this. The first time I read the book, The Challenger's Sale, I was pretty disturbed by how aggressive they went against relationship selling. And they just, at that point, I guess they were trying to make a point that there are other ways to do this. And they were making a point about sales reps challenging buyers. And, there's something there in some ways, but there's also a lot of friction and conflict that gets put into this that doesn't really give you as much value back, in my opinion, as what the writers of the Challenger Sale we're trying to get to there. But what's your point of view on that? How do you balance the two in the world of data? How do you make sure your sales team still understands how important the relationships are everywhere? And that is not only with your buyers, but inside your own company, the collaboration with different functional areas within Oracle.
Yeah, I mean
Love to
that.
learn more.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean that's a lot to unpack from the question. Um, but again, if you break it down, going back to sports, and if you look at professional sports, and you look at those that only believe in analytics and they make these decisions on the field without intuition, right? They usually fail. And you've seen
Yeah.
that, and you can debate that in the NFL playoffs that just went on. You see that in the NBA, constantly. And, you have to have that intuition and you have to bring that to the table. So, again, data is extremely important. It does build that foundation. It's table stakes really at this point, because everybody has access now to that same data. And that's going to be an interesting thing with AIs. Then how do you differentiate? All right, so you don't have a bunch of intelligent robots walking around
Mhm.
in the lobby of a customer and meeting with the customer, but how do you differentiate? So, I think you have to be able to measure it, as we said, but at the end of the day, you have to have that intuition so that you really how to call it, and if a deal's going to happen or not. And I think we've all been around where people use, hey, what's your gut say on this deal? Um, and as corny as that sounds, it's still very important because you know the competition is probably reporting almost the same story to their management, right? So that it comes down to, okay, are we really winning this or not? And what's the customer saying, right? And that's where, when we've been around a long time, if you get a few tidbits of how they're kind of relaying the message of the customer back to myself or to my leaders, we then can get the gut feeling, okay, this deal's going to happen, right? Barring anything that's not fundamental to the process. Um, and I learned that living in Japan and selling into Japanese companies, and not even understanding the language, right? And we were able to do big strategic deals, but it was about asking the questions with the partners selling into the account, the sales team, talking to other layers of the customer, our coaches, and getting that kind of story. And you just can't get that by data alone, right? And look, as you guys know, at an Oracle and selling enterprise software in general, which takes an education just just to let people know what ERP actually means, and why are these customers investing so much into software.
Yeah.
You got to really understand what you're providing to the customer and how you're building up that value proposition, because they're going to be spending a significant amount of money and investment, and it's a long term relationship. You're right. This isn't go sell the software, move on. Customer takes it. The partner builds it. With the customer, and gets it to go live. Those are the old days. And if you're selling simple solutions, yeah, you might not need that strategic relationship. It's going to be a fast sell. That's not what we're all about. We're in enterprise applications is about selling value. It's about looking at a 5, 7, 10-year horizon with your customer and gaining that trust. And then, over time, if you gain that trust, going back to your metrics question about how do you convince folks, if you look back at really successful sales models within strategic accounts and you look at the growth of investment of those accounts over the years, I should say, and you use those as examples, with the frontline rep who's selling a small deal to start, but you actually tell them the story of, hey, if you keep at it and you keep adding value over time, this is going to pay off in spades for you and for the customer, which is really the most important mark. Yeah.
Rob, I'd love to go back a teeny bit to talk about Japan, because you're one of the few guests that I know you've spent, I think, a few rounds through Japan.
Yep.
One at SAP, and I think earlier in your career, and then again with space time. What lessons did you take? Well, first of all, did that experience help you to be a more successful leader in the US when you came back? What lessons did you take back from that you could apply, or even, lessons to give sort of aspiring sales leaders or CROs coming up the ranks? I'm
Yeah.
just curious on that culture and how it's,
Yeah.
impactful.
No doubt. It changed my career from the start. I lived there out of college for 2 years. Worked at a Japanese company. I actually learned how to sell and how to work and be. The words won't even come to me, but how you get trained in a Japanese company is like no other. And I had the opportunity at a very young age to get trained, and then come back. And the beauty of doing that, and whether you take a semester abroad for kids in college, I highly encourage spending time outside of your own country and even state, so that you reflect differently on the pros and cons of where you come from. And so that helped me tremendously, from just my personal skill set, and then being able to leverage that to go back to Japan with that other company, whereas Blue
I know
Crow,
you're not allowed. I know you're not allowed to say that company now.
that team, which it really helped me. One, the excuses are all the same. So no matter where you live in the world, when a deal doesn't happen, you get the same excuses. They might, a little bit less descriptive potentially, but that falls back to my philosophy and strong belief, no matter where you are, because we sold everywhere when we were at Space Time Insight, and I was running that company. Is the sales process at the end of the day is the same. How you get from A to Z is different because the flow is different, but you still fundamentally, you need the data, right? You need to find where there's need. You need to find the coach and the buyer, and you got to provide value, and you got to work within their time frame from a budget perspective, and that whole process. In between that, steps can be a little bit different, especially out of all due respect of Japan and the Japanese culture, nemawashi, which is consensus building. You got to cut through that. So then you got to learn how to manage through. And every culture has its own nuances of how do you get to yes, right? So that really is fundamentally the difference. And it really helped me in my career across the board, especially the other thing that really working in Japan, and especially when you're at an Oracle or an SAP or a Salesforce, you're out, because if you're going to be a foreigner there, most likely you're in a managing director role. You're going to be out with the CEOs of these companies, and having access to the CEOs of the Fortune 100 there is really starts building up your confidence. It teaches you whether they make the decision or not. In many cases, they actually don't there, for the company in terms of buying decisions, but it just gives you that experience. And that's where I always try to encourage folks: just take some risks, go out and reach out to these execs. They're no different than you. It's the same thing as meeting a professional athlete, right? When you meet them, whether they're speaking at your conference or you just happen to be on the plane sitting next to them, they're normal human beings, right? You don't need to be intimidated, and you just break that down and you have a nice conversation with them, and all of a sudden you start building a relationship. So for me, that was everything for my career, was spending that time. And I highly encourage people to get out of their comfort zone, really is the net of that, and challenge yourself that way.
So, Rob, what advice do you have for soon-to-be CROs or recent CROs on their role now in the AI era, right? The world where you hear the term AI every 6 minutes in your day, no matter what you
Right.
do or where you are. What type of advice and perspective would you share around that?
Well, I would definitely tell those CROs, get after it, understand it, because your board is going to be asking about it. Wrong, right, or indifferent, because it's a buzzword and it's hitting everything. It is probably by far the number one conversation at the board level. So your CEO is going to be asking you, because that CEO is going to be asked by the board, what are we doing with AI? What's this generative AI? How do we go capitalize on that? So yeah, you have to study it, get educated on it, and then embrace it. I mean, it's not going away. So why not be the best of how do you capitalize on AI and that wave? And speaking of that wave, there's a great book called The Coming Wave that I've been listening to for myself to get educated. And look, I ran a startup for 8 years, and Cathy was there with me, and it was an AI company. So at the end of the day, um, AI is not new. It's the access to the data, at speeds we've never seen. But it's also, it's amazing. So it's by Mustafa Solomon, who's co-founder of DeepMind, one of the co-founders of DeepMind, and a brilliant way of looking at, and he simplifies it down, but where it is today and where it's headed. And yeah, new, it's scary in some aspects, and it's unbelievably. I think it's. I'm very optimistic about the future with AI, as long as it's contained, and the things that we can be able to do in the future, and hopefully, you know, solve challenges that we've never been able to solve, and whether it's getting rid of cancer completely, which would be unbelievable. Fixing Alzheimer's and all those opportunities, I think are outweigh the risk. But for sales professionals, yeah, you better embrace it. You better understand it, and then show how your solutions are stepping into it. Recently, I had a dinner real quick with a customer, and he is setting his execs. He has 4 execs, and he's like, go off to these companies, Oracle being one, and understand what they're doing with AI, generative AI, machine learning, and come back. Right? I already have my ideas, right, of who's in the lead, who's not, but I want you all 4 to go out to these different places and come back and then present that back. And let's have a discussion of where we're going to put our chips. And, look, it's new. It's from the aspect of a lot of companies coming out with new ideas around AI. It's like the cloud, we talk a lot about the cloud. You're not going to put all your chips in one basket. So you're going to spread them around until things get more defined. And, that's the excitement of it. Very few of us have worked through different revolutions of whether it's not dating ourselves in the industrial age, but
Right.
major, we were here when the internet came out, and the changes there and how that affected the business. And I
I
think
think
that's exciting. Yeah.
I think I was at Oracle in 1999 when the term "the internet is everything" I think Larry coined back then. And you think about, I think a lot, dating myself as well, of these waves of technology, and we saw it happen with .com and just being on the internet. And okay, now I have a storefront that's on the internet, and of course later you're just a storefront or your online store. And I'm almost seeing AI get to that point, at this point, where companies are slapping AI for everything versus focusing actually on the problem that's being solved by that particular company. And it's getting almost to that point of overuse, like cloud kind of got there as well. And I'm curious, I think when you break it down, and Mark and I talk about this a lot, AI and generative AI, I think of very differently, because
Yeah.
the Gen AI there's such simple use cases for Gen AI, and it's actually the easiest thing I've ever used, right? In terms of a
Yeah.
piece of technology, that the barrier to entry to use Gen AI is like the easiest thing ever. And you see companies like ServiceNow and Bill McDermott actually changing like their quarterly results because of putting the Gen AI piece onto the productivity side. So just curious, like when you think about it, do you think do you also feel sort of AI is getting to that breaking point in all of the waves of technology that we've seen? Because you're right, we were working on AI, anomaly, like all that stuff back in 2015, right?
Yeah.
So don't know if that question made sense, but it just feels like it's at that hype point beyond, as Mark said, every 6 minutes.
Yeah, I personally don't even think we're at the pinnacle of the hype. So, I think it's going to go to a whole nother level. So, no, I think it's fueling. They're really, there's so much. I mean, if you just look at the amount of data that Uber has, what they manage, and you think about the data infrastructure that needs to handle that, Oracle's a big provider there and partner with Uber. Um, it's vast. And the amount of analytics that they're going to keep providing and information that they're going to be able to dissect about each one of us and where we're traveling to, how we're traveling, duration, spend. It's endless. So I think the hype is there, but I think the hype is real. And but there again, going back to machine learning and analytics, Oracle's had that in our applications for many, many years, and especially in Fusion and the cloud, and it's woven in with each one of our products, and it's only going to get better. And generative AI, as you mentioned, that's going to be an interesting one of how companies adopt that, because if you're in energy or you're in healthcare or any other, business where you have to protect the end customer's data, you're going to think twice before you go out to an open environment with that data. Mm-hmm. So it needs to be contained. It needs to be secure. And then it comes back to what's the business value that you're going to be able to drive because you're getting those insights. Because, as you said, it's very easy. If I wanted to start a company today and I wanted to go out and I could put a bunch of recs out and use generative AI and produce those in minutes. It's brilliant, just with a little bit of editing. So I think there's a lot of quick wins, and then it's going to keep evolving where it really makes sense from a business perspective.
Perfect. Well, let's close on a few rapid fire questions. And I guess first one, a CEO you admire.
CEO, gosh, well, I'm not going to jump out in the tech world because I've worked for some of the best, and I continually work for the best, in my humble opinion. I would say Steve Kerr. I love Steve Kerr. Yeah.
Everything awesome. Okay. Essential tool for every CRO, but not an Oracle product.
The internet, ChatGPT.
Right.
Beautiful. Advice you'd give to your 21-year-old self.
Take risks, take calculated risks, and keep believing in yourself and being optimistic.
Beautiful. Predictions for the CRO role in 24.
It's going to keep evolving, but it's critically important. And you better know, you better have your analytics put together and know your data.
Can I ask I want to ask a follow-up question to that, yeah. Mark. So the average CRO tenure is 18 months. And that is a scary figure. What has to change for that to get longer? What's like in your mind? I know that's probably a longer question than these rapid fires, but I think it's interesting. You've obviously had this very long and successful career, stayed at companies a long time and been successful. I think we're still recording, so keep talking. He'll come back on. But yeah, what do you think needs to get that 18 months to something more reasonable?
I think you gotta do your best, especially at small companies, to set expectations of your CEO and the board of reality while you go into these roles, because at the end of the day, especially at small companies, you're always going to blame sales, right? You really, there's just so much you can cut from the business for operational efficiencies. And so at the end of the day, then it's growth and it's revenue. So what I would say is, one, try to reset expectations of you want the job, so you got to get in, and then try to work and reset expectations of the CEO and the board of realistic growth. And then do everything you can, and this is where the data becomes incredibly important, that you're showing that you understand the business. You have data to defend your intuition or your thoughts about the growth prospects, and then you're doing everything you can to communicate and be transparent. And then hopefully you got a reasonable board and CEO to get you past the 18-month hurdle. Yeah.
Well, Rob, thank you for taking the time with us today. This was fantastic. Cathy, thank you as always, and thanks to our incredible audience for joining us
Thank
again.
you.
Thanks, Rob. It was
All the
great.
best.
Thanks, Mark.
Appreciate it. Thanks.